Hi everyone, it's Ajanette and I am here to go over your first chapter lecture. So our chapter one is really just introducing us to the field, helping us to understand who it is that seeks out service and why, and helping us to understand the diversity of the field so that we can explore what we might want to pursue as practitioners and some things that we might encounter as well. So let's see if the slide will let me move. Great. So I want to first just open up a conversation about, what do we think the perception is of human services? So when people think of human services, what's the first thing that comes to their mind? And if you just ask people around you, and I'd like you to do that, like just take a minute to go ask maybe 5 people, what do they think of when they hear human services? And here's some feedback that I received when I did that. So they think of welfare um, and the EBT cards. And yes, that is part of human services and social services, but it's not the only thing that is addressed in social services. And often with that comes a lot of stigma with the people who are using those benefits and a lack of recognition that those benefits are there and important to make sure that we're supporting all aspects of the community and recognizing that there's systemic issues that might contribute to people needing those benefits. Another answer that I got was CPS, Child Protective Services. In fact, when you talk to people about social work and what is a social worker, often the CPS worker comes to mind. And again, there's stigma associated with that, right? And we need to be mindful that there's also overrepresentation of marginalized populations in CPS. And there's overrepresentation of low socioeconomic groups in CPS. So depending upon your social class and your racial class and your educational class, right, that might increase your risk of a case being opened on your family for the same exact situation, only we don't perceive all groups the same. And so unfortunately, that means that some groups are overrepresented. And that's part of what draws me to social work is addressing those inequities, addressing those social injustices, and trying to make a difference in changing those and offering a fair, objective, unbiased lens and treating all people with dignity and compassion. So social justice is when we see certain social groups experiencing more hardships, more inequities, lack of access to resources, facing more barriers just to really exist and go through life. You also, when asking people what they thought of human services, you get some political feedback, right? Bleeding heart liberals, those are programs that we want to try to rein in and not use our national resources on. It's those bleeding heart liberals. In reality, we have corporate welfare in our system all the time. If you've ever heard of a corporate bailout, the automotive bailouts, almost every economic downturn that we experience, there's bailouts involved. Even with COVID, there's bailouts involved. And we bail out large corporations, very wealthy individuals, and then the individuals that hold their stocks, who also tend to be wealthier, middle class or above, they get bailouts all the time, and that is effectively welfare. So somehow when we offer support and resources to lower income groups, somehow it's stigmatized. And that's not okay. We need to recognize that there is just as much validity, if not more, in supporting our lower socioeconomic groups and our disenfranchised populations and offering them support and resources, there's just as much value of that, again, if not more, than supporting our economic stability by funding bailouts for our large corporations. And then another stereotype that's often faced is people who receive human services or social services, somehow they're vilified. They are perceived as criminals if they need a support with, integrating back into the system if they've been impacted by the justice system, or drug addiction. Somehow we make it about their character and their behavior and their choices, and we don't recognize the biological underpinnings associated with addiction. When we talk about people receiving social services or any kind of Medi-Cal type benefits, not Medi-Cal, Medicare or Medicaid type benefits, then we, perceive them as lazy and they don't want to get a job. Well, the fact of the matter is in our country, a lot of your health insurance is directly tied to jobs, and not all jobs offer that access to that health insurance, particularly for part-time workers. And so again, it's about corporate profit. It's about capitalism. I want to not build an employee structure that's in the best interest of my employees and offer them a livable wage, including health insurance. Rather, I want to pay the bare minimum possible, and I want to build a structure that maximizes my profit, regardless of the impact it has on my employees. So I want to be mindful of these stereotypes. I want to be mindful of these characterizations as we are stepping into this field and understanding it, so that I can call upon all of you to change these perceptions. And certainly to be mindful of your own biases and perceptions as you're entering the field, so you can treat all people with dignity and compassion. So when we talk about human service networks or human service, I'm just going to move this back over. There we go. When we talk about delivery systems, then what we're really talking about is groups of nonprofits, organizations, and/or public service organizations that support a specific need. So maybe that's addiction. Maybe that's homelessness. Maybe that's transitioning people out of incarceration and helping them reintegrate into society. So that's a particular need, a social problem that we're trying to address. And there's different providers involved in doing that. And they can work across all different levels. So the people that you're working with, some might be volunteers. Some might have associate's degrees and be trained in as a drug and alcohol counselor. Some might bring life experience. Maybe they struggled with addictions or their family has been impacted by addictions. But the people that you're working with really represent a diverse group of individuals that often share a common passion for that particular area. The systems can be nonprofit structures, they can be for-profit structures, they can be a social service public funded structure. Some of them can be, where they have live-in facilities. Some of them can be where it's outpatient only. So there's all different types of organizations within a network. And so it's really about finding out what makes sense for your client. What are the needs of your client? What resources are available in your local community? What are the different structures and programs available in your community? And who also has availability and access, right? And so you might have different clients getting different experiences and different access, and certainly in different communities, the resources available are going to be completely different. So it's really important to understand that diversity of not just the systems, but the professionals that you're working with. And again, because they share a common passion, regardless of their education, regardless of their training, they still should be treated with dignity and gratitude, because it does take a lot, whether they're volunteers or whether they're an executive director running an organization, they still bring passion to the field and to the problem and to the needs. So by all means, whatever their role, treat them with gratitude, with kindness, with respect, because we all have a unified commitment to addressing these needs. So let's talk a little bit about being a human service worker. So as I just described the different structures, it's really important for you to kind of think about different settings that you might interact with in your field work as you advance in your education and you take more courses and you're doing more volunteering and you're doing more formal placements. Be mindful of those different settings, of those different structures. Be mindful of the different ways in which or formats in which we offer services and treatment. And think about what structure and what setting and what format makes you most comfortable. Where do you feel like you might be a good fit? Because these, and they also will talk a little bit more later about kind of their theoretical models and their philosophies, because those all are really important things for you to consider. Where would you like to fit into the human services field? It's a vast field with a number of options, and it's not uncommon that human service workers and social workers get burned out. When you're in a field where you're giving and you're helping, and you're often giving of all of you, your heart and soul, it's really easy to get burned out. So being intentional about selecting the types of programs and the types of areas that you want to work in can be really, really protective of you down the road. So I'm going to encourage you in your field work, in your volunteer work, try different organizations in different areas, even areas that you think, oh, I don't want to work in there. Try it anyway. When my mom was doing her social worker training, she was very intentional about working in every different area. She found out she liked things that she didn't think she would like. And she found out she was a good fit for things that she didn't think she was a good fit for. She kind of wanted to avoid working in the foster care system and the CPS system because she herself was in fact in foster care. And what she found was she drew upon that experience and she thrived in that area, and she made such a difference for the children that she served and supported. So I do want you to look at different organizations. Sometimes the larger organizations might have a little bit more structure, so you can specialize a little bit more, and the smaller agencies might require you to wear multiple hats, so you might be more of a generalist, and even that is about preference and what works best for you. Citizen groups are groups that are advocacy groups, and they really want to fight for rights, right? The rights of citizens. Again, they often might specialize. You might have like the community, or excuse me, the Veterans Resource Center. That's a community, that's a citizen group where they come together and they support veterans. They'll help them fill out paperwork, and they will help them apply for different funding options or disability status, or they might help them find housing, or they might help them find support through addiction. So they can be really powerful groups. Not only can they provide services directly to that particular group, but then they also can serve as an advocacy group or a lobbying group with legislators, where they actually bring the needs to the attention of our legislators. Or sometimes it might go the opposite direction, where our legislators might want research and they work with these organizations to partner with them to gain access to the groups and gain access to data that can help them make decisions in the legislature. So These advocacy groups often look to hire human service workers, social workers, because again, we share that common passion and commitment for advocacy of seeing social needs and trying to support and meet those needs. And so that's a little bit about some citizen groups. There's mutual aid groups or self-help groups, support groups, where people from within that social problem or within that social need help one another to get through. So Alcoholics Anonymous is a big one where you find recovering alcoholics supporting, encouraging, uplifting, and offering a place of safety to find healing for other individuals who might just be entering recovery or who maybe are trying to figure out if recovery is for them, or maybe even people that have been court mandated to go to these types of groups. Alcoholics Anonymous has had huge success. So it's a very common treatment model that we see in this area. But again, this is a very powerful way or structure of helping people. Is who knows best what they're going through than someone that's been there, right? So that's why it's such a huge part of our field, and it really does tend to be something that people in need relate to. So when we talk about human service organizations, I want you to think about their funding structures as well. Some might be funded through local city programs. In the city where I lived in California, they had very much a citywide commitment, a city task force focused on supporting the needs of unhoused individuals and community members. And that local organization actually applied for state funding and for federal funding and were able to secure huge grants at the state and federal level to support some housing structures. So they have a couple of different projects that were launched out of those grant efforts. And they were able to build a program that did short-term housing, and now they're building long-term housing. And they're actually taking over a former building and repurposing it. And so working at those different levels, you have different complexities, different requirements, right? But it's not uncommon if you're a mover and a shaker in a particular area. I have a dear friend who is an executive chair of a board for a homeless shelter in the community. And she also sits on a housing commission. And she interacts with all these different officials at the local and state level. She doesn't interact as much with officials at the federal level, but she very much has a very close relationship with our mayor and our local city officials, and very much has a relationship with some of our congressional members and our state senators, because she's involved in all these different structures that support housing and homelessness. And so keep that in mind. You're going to be working within these very expansive networks. Other organizations might be funded by religious groups. The Catholic Church and the Lutheran faith, they actually have social service agencies and branches within their organizations. And so they fund, sometimes they fund food banks, sometimes they fund homeless shelters. They fund them and they run them. And they actually pay for the education and training of individuals within their faith and their religious structures, their church structures, to go to school and get the training to help run these programs. Sometimes it's philanthropic groups. So your nonprofit, we see this with like the Red Cross. They're very heavily involved in meeting these social problems and social needs. And the Goodwill Industries. They do a lot of like behind the scenes work. Often people think of them as just a thrift store, but they really help individuals, particularly that may have struggled with addiction or have been impacted by the justice system, and they help with job placement and job training. And so these large philanthropic organizations are sometimes one of your greatest connections to addressing these social problems. But we do see more and more and more social services being privatized, right? Um, where uh, we have these kind of hybrid models where they have been started to address a social problem. Maybe they have a nonprofit, but then they might also have a for-profit branch where they're able to assess fees, and those profits that come from those fees can be reinvested into the nonprofit work that they do. Or there's some that are just totally for profit. We see this with like the prisons, where they are run by private for-profit organizations. And I would say that model receives a huge amount of criticism for just cause, right? Because then at some point, the decisions they're making are based upon the profit of the larger organization rather than the humanity and the dignity and the needs of the people that they're serving. And, no matter what the public may think, even individuals who are incarcerated, they are our clients. When we are working within that system and we are supporting them, they are our clients and we are serving them. And so I just take a very different approach to the incarceration system. I have more of a restorative justice lens. I really do look at it as an opportunity for remediation and rehabilitation, and not purely as punitive. Now, there are some individuals that maybe they should be in an institution where it's less about rehabilitation and it's really about just allowing them a dignified place to live out their life. And that's fine, but they still should be treated with humanity and dignity. And so our system has a lot of reworking to be done. Tons of controversy in this area. So are just as diverse as our human service organizations are the workers within them. So we come in all shapes, sizes, and we work in a variety of settings. And for some, for some of you, you might find that a residential facility makes your heart go pitter patter. For others, maybe maybe it doesn't, right? But you're going to work in a variety of settings. You're going to be exposed to different organizations, and you are going to find your joy in your place. One other thing that I want you to consider, in addition to all the things that we've already talked about, is the treatment models in place. And so I'm just going to see if I can move my little image over here so I'm not blocking the image for you. And so when we talk about treatment models, your book references some of the theorists, right? Sigmund Freud is more of a psychoanalytic. So over here in this graph, he's psychoanalytic, psychodynamic, where it's centered a lot on, a one-on-one relationship with either a psychiatrist, typically a therapist. Psychiatrists really just manage the medication. Erik Erikson falls into a psychodynamic, but he doesn't think that the impetus of your psychological challenges comes from any kind of sexual conflicts. He thinks they come from a psychosocial challenge where you didn't resolve a conflict at any particular stage of life in a healthy, constructive way. And so going back and revisiting that can be helpful. When you talk about Skinner, Skinner is more of the behavioral lens. Skinner specifically is operant conditioning, so believing that your behavior is influenced by rewards and punishments that you experience in the environment, whether it's praise or whether it's beatings and abuse, right? That particular consequence right, result of a behavior now is going to either increase that behavior or decrease that behavior. And so that's operant conditioning. Classical conditioning and social learning theory are also part of the behavioral perspective, but basically the behavioral perspective suggests that it's our environment that shapes us. And while I believe the environment's critical and important, I'm definitely not a true behaviorist. I'm probably more of the humanistic, so Carl Rogers definitely falls into the humanistic. And I would say, well, Glasser's probably cognitive, but has some humanistic elements as well. Um, but humanistic has more of a positive, empowering, client-centered approach where the client gets to be part of their treatment. They kind of own their treatment and their outcomes. And it's based in kind of a philosophy and hope and belief in humanity as a whole. So it doesn't really look at them as innately bad, but instead innately good and with huge potential. Um, and so it's a little bit more affirming. The cognitive models tend to really think about kind of that internal dialogue that you're having and teaching clients to be mindful of that dialogue and teaching clients to interrupt negative dialogues that they might be having with themselves and that faulty thinking and reframing that faulty thinking into empowering, constructive, affirming language that can actually support their growth and change. And then the systemic model, the constructionist and systemic model aren't really represented here in the theorists listed. But when you're talking about the constructivist model, we kind of make up shit in our heads sometimes, right? And it's very common, like when you're experiencing depression or let's talk about eating disorders, right? Where in our mind, and this ties to the cognitive, um, but in our mind, we might see ourselves as fat, ugly, unworthy. And unfortunately, we create this reality in our minds that we're unlovable um, and, you know, that we're undeserving and or powerless. And sometimes controlling our food intake is our only sense of power and control in a circumstance. And so that might make us more vulnerable then to falling prey to these psychological disorders that then also interact with our physical circumstances, and then that situation compounds. So I do want to just take a moment to say, really, regardless of the perspective, regardless of the theoretical perspective, um, you know, the one that's not listed here is the biological model. Psychology works hand in hand with biology. Our psychological and social functioning is very much tied to what's happening in our bodies. Sometimes those underlying um, chemical balances can be off. Sometimes there might be differences in our brain structures, our hormonal balances, all of those physiological and biological things happening under our skin impact our psychological health and well-being and our functioning. So it's important to realize that it is not simply the environment that shapes us. We have genetics at play, right? Like I come from a family of addicts. I come from a family where there's dual diagnosis, where they're not just diagnosed with a mental health issue, but also an addiction. And those things go hand in hand. My dad had bipolar schizoaffective disorder. So when he was in his periods of mania, he often experienced psychosis. And he started to have symptoms at a young age, and he started to engage in drinking, possibly as a means of self-medication. He really didn't understand what was happening. It really wasn't until he was in his late 40s that he was finally diagnosed and able to get help. And the 12-step program through AA was a huge part of that. He did get sober. He did start seeing a psychiatrist. He did start going to therapy. He did start going to support groups. And he turned his life around. He did go to the Veterans Resource Center, and we did get him um, reviewed for a disability rating, and he thankfully won that. And he also had Social Security disability. And so they were long fights for us. We had to work within the systems and work with different organizations and agencies to get him the help that he needed. So I don't work directly in the human services field. Well, I would argue I do because I'm in the community college system. And I believe everyone working in the community college system needs to be a human service worker and a social worker because we serve the most disenfranchised populations who've been underrepresented in higher education since the inception of our country. People for whom community college is their only opportunity for social mobility, where those individuals take that knowledge back to their homes, to their families, to their communities, and they change the world. So I believe I'm changing the world one student at a time. My human services and social work training and background affords me the opportunity to bring that advocacy to the classroom and to the college campus. And I can be an advocate to support their needs getting met through the college and through linking them with appropriate community service organizations. So um, in any event, most people subscribe to more of an eclectic approach where they're not really locked into any one theoretical model. But it depends on the agency that you work with. Some agencies may adhere to only one particular framework. And again, that should align with your particular beliefs. So if a model doesn't sit well with you, it would be really hard to work in an agency that only used that theoretical model because then you don't feel like your clients are really getting the help and treatment that they need. I could never work with an agency that only used a psychoanalytic approach. I just couldn't do it. There's not a lot of research to support the success and efficacy of that approach. I also couldn't work with an agency that purely did behavioral without considering the underlying biological, physiological, and psychological elements contributing to people's well-being. So really, as you're pursuing this education and you're taking more classes and you're in the field, pay attention to the models that are being utilized. And maybe as you advance, right, maybe you start as a paraprofessional, but you're going to continue on and you're going to become a therapist someday. Be mindful of these models and which ones do you want to integrate into your practice? Which ones do you want to utilize to support your clients over time? So just planting seeds. Okay, so let's move on. I do want to go back to a little bit about our faith-based organizations. I will tell you, I'm very thankful, although I individually don't prescribe to a particular faith. Um, I am very thankful for faith-based social services because I have utilized counseling through the Lutheran Social Services program, and they got me through some very, very difficult times. My mom has utilized food banks at the Catholic Church. And, you know, I know lots of individuals who find tremendous comfort in their faith and who look to their religious organizations, their churches, to help support family members that are in need. It's very common to have AA meetings being held at local churches. And so when you look at the history of social work and human services, they actually were born out of churches doing this type of work, seeing needs and helping others. And for me, I feel like we need more of this, right? We need to go back to those roots and those origins where churches were themselves focused on this community service work. Sometimes we see churches have different structures, and many Many even have for-profit structures now, and they may have moved away from this focus and this calling. But our faith-based organizations that are still in it, we're very thankful for them, and we're thankful for their leadership that they bring to this field, and to the support they offer the community. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about laws. Um, Here's the sad thing is, I don't want to say it's completely sad because certainly we respect states' rights, right? But unfortunately, laws are often the result of politics, and politics can change like the wind. And so laws vary across states, and in some states, people may have more access to resources than in others. In some states, they might have much more restrictive access laws, and so you have to jump through a lot more hoops to get services. And that can be a huge challenge and barrier. Um, and so these different legislative and policy approaches do create disparities from one state to another. There also might be power struggles where you have federal policies that might be in conflict with state policies, or you have federal kind of uh, territorialism where they might want to have authority over a particular area than others. And so it can create a lot of discontinuity. Um, and so when we move as individuals, when we move states, we might have to learn a whole new set of policies. This may even occur at the local level if we move into a new city or a new county. We might find that there's regional differences as well. So be mindful of that as you're relocating. Um, even going from college to college, different services and resources are available for students. So I've taught in LA County, I've taught in San Diego County, I've taught in Riverside County, and each one has different services available to students. So those are like our own little cities, right? Where we have 12 to 15,000 people we're serving in one particular college district. And in one college district, they have a wealth of resources and services, and in another, they don't. So expect those variations. You might see some that have a lot of continuity, like Head Start. Head Start is really grounded in a lot of research. And in fact, a lot of the support that we got for it, legislative and funding support for Head Start, was based on the research where we showed that children who Head Start is a publicly funded preschool program for low-income families. And the Head Start model doesn't just provide preschool to the child, they also provide kind of wraparound services to the whole family. So they might have ESL classes available to the family. They have dental vans that come in and do health checks. They have education on vaccinations, and they might do vaccination clinics. So they really look at supporting the well-being of the whole child and the family, because systemic models, it really is a systemic model where we look at not just addressing the child, but understanding the child is developing within a systemic they're in complex layers, right? And so they're interacting with other systems. Their family is a system. Their extended family and neighborhood is a system. Their city is a system. Their school is a system. And so they're interacting with all these different systems, and Head Start tries to address the family system, the needs of the family system. So just be mindful of that. It's I would say if you have an opportunity to be involved in research as either a researcher or as a community participant in research, do it. And certainly rely on the research as a practitioner, as a professional, whether you're a paraprofessional or a licensed professional in the field, or whatever it might be. Rely on research to make informed critical decisions about the work that you do. Um, okay, So when we talk about how do we find these social services, how do you find social service agencies that you might want to volunteer in, or you might want to do some field work in, or you might want to explore as you advance in this career? Sometimes there are, if you pay attention to what's happening in your community, sometimes chambers of commerce might tell you what's happening with like your corporations, right? They're often centered on for-profits, but there's often a network of nonprofits and philanthropic organizations, Kiwanis or Rotary clubs in your area, and often when you hook up with one, like they know about others and the networks. So sometimes you can just Google in your area what the local nonprofits are. Sometimes you can do some internet searches and come across directories or seek out directories. And so these are some common directories or organizations that provide more comprehensive directories of services. So looking for a United Way in your region um, might help you locate what the different services are. And so when you talk about comprehensive directories, they list out things typically by social need or social cause, and then you can usually find the organizations or the programs or resources that help support the needs in that particular area. You might also have a problem specific directory where you're looking at, like, let's say addiction, and it tells you different agencies, organizations, and structures that might be available to support that need. Sometimes, like I mentioned, Rotary, that's a national organization, and then they have different local chapters throughout, and they are often a good source of finding out what different programs and social services are available. Um, you might have a particular objective directory where there's a shared objective or mission or purpose, and they're they're they have this common, like, fact-based objective. You know what they're doing, right? And who's part of that effort. And everything's kind of tangible, written out, and you can see, like, these are just objectively who's involved. Then you can have subjective directories, which are more of kind of, let's call it a review or rating system, right? Where someone has assessed like the quality of services that might be available. And in a time and era of like Yelp reviews and Google reviews and TikTok reviews, that might be really helpful. People might actually find comfort in that and seeing, based on data that other people have collected and based on visits that other maybe outside organizations have had, what is the review of these individuals. So other resources, you can actually, many organizations have hotlines. You find this like in the LGBTQ community. It's not uncommon to have hotlines for people in need or suicide hotlines, things of that nature. You can also call 211 from a local phone. I'm not sure if cell phone providers, all cell phone providers have access to this, but give it a shot. Call 211 on your phone. As a matter of fact, we might do that as an activity. Call 211 and see what they tell you, what's available in your local area. Pick a cause and see if they have robust resources in your community for that particular cause. Newspapers, sometimes we might even have like little local magazines. In the city where I just came from, they have a little local HSER magazine, and it tells you about the different organizations. Sometimes going down to the city or attending city council meetings, you might be able to interact with people from these different agencies because they often might serve as resources or advocates for the cause at those meetings. So that might be a resource. And then just using the good old internet and finding chat spaces and community might be helpful. So let's talk about, all right, so we know the different organizations and structures and who's working in those structures, and we found out ways to find out what resources and programs are available in our community. So if we can do that, the people in need can do that too. So why don't they get help? What are some barriers? Stigma is a huge barrier. Stigma is when we might victim blame. We might degrade them, those stereotypes that we opened up with. And we make them feel as if somehow they're a failure. That can be a problem. People don't want to get help because getting help means admitting they have a problem, and it means taking on a lot of the negative views that people hold toward people with that problem. And so we want to be mindful of that. We need to start talking about these issues openly. I am a domestic violence survivor. I am a sexual assault survivor. I am the child of an alcoholic. I am a member of a family with countless mental health disorders diagnosed, in treatment. And so the more we talk about those things, the more we can break down that stigma. I love when celebrities share their concerns and share their own experiences, because it helps shed the light on these important issues, and it helps us realize these issues affect everyone. No one is immune. They affect all genders, all races, all economic classes. And so it's really important that we break down the stigma, because stigma keeps people from getting help. We might also face our own internal or external pressures. Maybe there's family injunctions that carry with us, and the shoulds, you should this, or you should that, or you're a failure here, or you're a failure. Those pressures, or we have a pressure to succeed or thrive or get a job or do this or do that. And these pressures might keep us from getting help, or sometimes even within our own job. Maybe we don't have the time to get help. So some people just don't have access. Every community is different. As I mentioned, there may not be resources and benefits available robustly in some communities, or maybe even getting there, depending upon what their policies are and the process they have to go through to access benefits. That in itself can be a pain in the ass sometimes, right? You need a car to transport you. Maybe I don't have a car. Maybe it's not close to a bus route. Maybe I have a physical or developmental disability that hinders me from interacting with the bus line system. Maybe I have anxiety and I can't leave the house. There's all kinds of ways that we might have our access blocked. And so we really have to be mindful of trying to reach people in different ways and having multiple access points, and making sure that it meets accessibility standards, even our website. And then additionally, sometimes we just have flat out inefficient systems, right? Our organizations do not function well. And particularly when you're talking about a lot of red tape. And sure, we're saying, oh, we're doing this great thing, but when you make it so difficult, then are we really doing that good work? So we really have to kind of reframe the policies and structures we're using to get these services to the hands of the people that need it. And then finally, the delivery methods. More and more and more, we see telehealth is becoming really important. It creates an access issue for some that don't have access to the technology, but then it opens up access to those that do have access to technology but don't have access to transportation or childcare or other things that might hinder them from utilizing services. So having multiple delivery methods is helpful because you meet different needs, and we can provide more comprehensive care overall. So, as you're thinking about choosing your role, I mentioned this when you work for a smaller organization, you might be more of a generalist where you're wearing multiple hats. So, you're learning the different areas of a service available. And you actually have to kind of know all the resources because you might be answering all the questions. If you don't have someone that specializes in a particular area, that means you have to learn more, right? So some people thrive in that kind of environment where they're learning multiple roles and they can really expand what we call the breadth of knowledge, the breadth, right? Where you have maybe a little bit of knowledge across a wide range of fields, or and maybe a little bit deeper in some, but it's a wide range of topics that you work with. And then there's more specialist approaches where they have depth of knowledge, where they only work with one particular area instead of a whole bunch of areas, but that allows them to dive deeper and really have a specialized understanding in that particular area. So they have very specialized roles. It's typically one role, right? But maybe they might have specialists that have a couple of different areas of specialty. So uh, it really depends. Some people thrive in being a specialist where they can really zero in, and some people like to wear that multiple hats. They like the variety. So as you're considering this field, I want you to think about the populations that you're serving and the problems you're addressing first and foremost. This is a calling. This is a sacred calling. So go to an area that speaks to you, that resonates with you. Many of you might already be inspired because you have lived experiences with a specific problem or population, either yours or a loved one. And so that's a wonderful thing. But don't limit yourself to just exploring that area. As you're studying this field and as you're doing field work and volunteer work for your academic requirements, please dip your toes in other waters because you might also find, sure, something inspired you to be here, but it might be the thing that leads you to your true calling. Okay, so just be open to the possibilities. Think about the type of agency, the setting. Think about that culture in that agency or that office. Um, do you feel at home? Is it a place where you can thrive? Do you feel like your values and ethics and worldviews and your attitudes can thrive and come to life where you can really grow? Does it is it going to be a good fit for you for who you are, your personality, the personal attributes and skills and strengths that you have? You know, I'm independent, I'm autonomous, I'm strong-willed, I'm stubborn, I'm tenacious, highly organized, detail-oriented. Um, I like tech, you know, and but I don't want to be responsible for managing my own technology. So those types of things, um, I want you to think about where you can thrive. And so as you're doing your hours in these different programs, take note, keep a journal, find out be mindful of the organizations that give you joy, where you really feel fulfilled. And that may not be the organization that pays the most, right? In fact, pay is a struggle in and of itself in this field because we're often underpaid for the work that we do. And that's a reflection sometimes of societal value of the work that we do. Um, but I do really want you to be intentional. Uh, it's not just about finding a job that will accept you, but finding a job and a career that is a good fit for you. Job interviews and these volunteer opportunities and internships and placements aren't just for you to prove that you're a good worker and an asset to the organization, but it's for you to really examine and research whether the organization is a good fit for you. Okay, so utilize that time. And once you find that place, once you find that home, do something great. Do something great, not only to serve the need for that area, do something great for yourself where you can really fulfill your goals and dreams. and you are changing the world one client at a time. And so you already are doing something great by pursuing this field. Continue to strive to your fullest potential, and collectively, we will change the world. Have a good one.